Hello, I'm Varsha Wallace, and this is One Precious Life. I'm particularly interested in fabulously regular people who are finding their calling, making the leap, or following their star, hearing stories of their precious working lives and beyond. Today, we're meeting Julie Mann. Julie originally started out in computer gaming and was involved in furniture and beauty businesses. Eventually, she returned to her family's roots in Chinese restaurants, launching an innovative fusion food venture, which we're going to hear more about, with some interesting twists and turns along the way. So, hello, Julie.
Hi, Vasha. Thank you for
Good to
having
see
me here.
you. So, we met through work. You and Julian, your now husband, were my bosses when I joined Philips as a publishing assistant way back in the 90s. And
Yeah.
so, what was your ambition at that point? What were you doing then?
Well, I think that's right. You were the publishing assistant, and I got promoted to publishing manager. And I joined this industry, which is the video games industry, which at the time was actually still very much in its development. It wasn't like the film industry, TV industry, or the music industry, which were very well developed. This was still quite a new industry. And I soon discovered it was a very exciting industry, very creative. Companies like Microsoft, Sony were getting into the business. Um, I remember going to a party that Philips threw when they were launching a new game, and there was a Sony executive there, and he had a Sony PlayStation prototype in his briefcase. And I said, "You must get it out. I must see it." And I think when that started to happen, I thought, "Yeah, this is the industry I'd like to be in." I fell into it.
You left school quite young, didn't you?
Yes,
I
I
seem to
did. Yeah,
recall.
I left school at 16. I didn't do my A levels. I didn't go to university.
Yeah,
And I moved up to London when I was just coming up to 17. And I got myself a job as a nanny during the summer. I then convinced my
yeah.
dad that he had to pay for me to go to secretarial college. So I went to secretarial college. I was also desperate to get into the music industry. I just wanted to get into the music industry. And before I'd even left secretarial college, I saw this ad in the Girls About Town magazine, which is given out every Monday morning at the Tube. And there was a job.
I remember those. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And there was a
yeah,
job going there for a music publisher called Chapel Music. Now, Chapel Music at that time was the biggest music publisher in the world. Now they've been taken over by Warner's. Went for the job and got it. So that was the start of my music business career. It was very rock and roll, had a great time. So I went from there, which was a massive music publishing company, to a much smaller one. And basically, I went to a company called Bright Music, and we looked after Fleetwood Mac and Moody Blues. And at the time, Fleetwood Mac were just launching their Tango in the Night album, which was their first album in 5 years, which was
yeah.
great fun. Also, at the same time, we looked after this artist called Kate Robbins. Now Kate is an actress, comedian, impressionist, songwriter,
Yeah,
highly talented. And she had a TV series in 1988 called The Kate Robbins Show. And she
yeah,
basically introduced me to the TV industry. So I then
yeah.
thought, oh, actually, I quite fancy a little gig in the TV industry. So again, I left Bright Music. I got a temp job again at LWT, and eventually got became. Eventually, I marketed their studio facilities in the South Bank studios. But during the early 1990s, LWT had to bid for their franchise again, and they laid off a lot of their staff, and I was made redundant too. So
Yeah.
then had to think, right, what do I do now? And I thought, well, I'll brush up my PA skills and I'll go off and get some temp work. And the first job I got was Philips Media. Walked in and started working for Julian. Um, and from there, he offered me the job as his PA, and that was
Yeah.
that was the start of my video games industry career.
Yeah, that was, and it was a really exciting time. I remember that
Yeah,
it really was.
yeah.
And from Philips, you went to, I mean, you left me and
I
went
know,
off.
I'm
You and
sorry
Julian
about
went off
that.
to Virgin.
Yes.
Yeah, and I remember, and then you went off to Virgin, and they were super cool at the time. They were
They
like the gaming company, weren't they? They were just so cool. It was.
they
I
were
seem to
ve
remember everyone
yeah,
wore black and kind of sat round on the floor playing computer games. It was like
yeah.
this cool place to be.
Yeah, and very controversial marketing plans. And when we used to have when we used to have the trade shows, Virgin had the most ridiculously brilliant, cool stands. That everyone wanted to go and do stand. See what's going on at Virgin. So yes, we went from Virgin. Then from Virgin, EA took over Virgin, and then after EA, I went on to Activision. So yeah,
Yeah.
that was my.
And then from and Activision was all the sort of what sort of did they like Tomb Raider and stuff
Yeah,
like
no,
that? Those kind of
Activision is
games.
Call of Duty.
Call of Duty. I
Yeah,
knew it was
cool.
some of those big.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
Activision was
So
was
you were
Call of
really
Duty.
working across. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you were having to and your role. I seem to remember you were kind of almost having to manage the games developers, the whole studio side, weren't you? And
Yeah, so I've had various roles in the games industry.
yeah,
Yes, I've done studio operations role, and that's right. We used to have quite big studios, and I'm very much involved in the studio operations side. So that's one side. Those are the internal studios. The other side I had was meeting up with third-party developers, so external developers who are always have pitching their services or pitching new game ideas to us. So basically, I was involved in both sides, but always in
yeah.
development, either internal
And
development or external.
it takes a long time to make a game, doesn't it?
Yes.
How long does it like? Or I don't know
Oh,
if it's changed since then. Obviously, I only
it's
did it in the 90s, but I imagine
yeah,
it was still
yeah,
quite a process, isn't it?
yeah. I would say it was still quite a process. It would take about a couple of years to make a game. Even back then,
Yeah.
it would take
Gosh.
2 years to make a game.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
How long does
And
it
always
take
very
now?
highly I'm very highly pressurized now because you always had to hit the
Yeah.
target of Christmas. I mean, games take 5 years to make
Yeah.
now, you know, and they're
Wow.
always evolving and
Wow.
they're always changing and they're always in beta
Yeah.
testing and yeah, so
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
very different now.
And, and so and then from there, I remember you had quite a life change, didn't you, in your sort of
Mm,
personal life that
mm.
it was around that time, wasn't it? Tell
Yeah.
me I remember
Yes.
your whole Brighton
Yes.
move and everything that
Yes.
happened then.
Yeah, that was in 2003. Basically,
Yeah.
what happened then was, there was a Julian's nieces and nephew lived in Brighton,
And
and they
Julian, we should say Julian, you married. You worked with him, and then you fell in love, and you got married, and you had a
yeah,
lovely wedding in Brighton. Which,
that's right,
yeah,
that's right. Yeah, we've known each other a long time, me and Julian. Well, I met him when I was
yeah,
25, so yeah. So
yeah,
yeah, so there was a family crisis going on in Brighton, and also at the same time, Julian and I were being made redundant from Activision because Europe
yeah,
weren't performing, so they were letting go a lot of people. So we were kind of free agents, and this crisis was happening in Brighton, and we decided to move down to Brighton. We bought a house, and Julian's nieces and nephew came, lived with us, moved in with us. So we took them on.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you had three teenagers
Well, actually,
that you,
three teenagers, but weekend
yeah,
six, because Julian had
yeah,
three children from his previous marriage. So yeah,
yeah.
every weekend was six teenagers in the house. Yeah.
There was a lot of washing going on, and
A lot of
looking
washing,
after
cooking, and
teenagers,
shopping.
and yeah. And then you also moved into a new role at that point,
Yeah,
work-wise.
it was a massive, massive change in my life. And the job I got I was still in the games industry, and I was approached by an agent called Jackie Lyons, who had a company called Marjack Micro. And she was a phenomenal woman because she was the first developer agent ever. Previous to that, she was a literary agent. And then she discovered all these developers who, in her opinion, felt were being ripped off and needed representing.
mainly
Yeah,
guys. They were
yeah,
kind of young guys
very young.
who
Yeah,
were
you met
kind
a
of
lot of them.
clever.
Yeah,
Yeah, and they were clever at maths and art
yeah,
and this real
yeah,
combination. And they were developing games in their garages almost,
yeah,
weren't they?
yeah.
And sort of
It was a
that,
cliche, but
they
yeah,
would
in
come
the
up with these,
garages, in the bedrooms,
yeah,
yeah, absolute cliche.
yeah, yeah,
And they were, as you said, extremely talented, but didn't have any idea of how to sell themselves or in terms of the
yeah.
business side of it. I mean, back in those days, I mean, it was still, the industry is very fledgling.
So Jackie saw an opportunity for that to
Yeah,
represent these
yeah,
guys
yeah,
and sort of negotiate their deals and
yeah,
look after them effectively.
yeah, yeah. Be like, yeah, absolutely. Be their managers, really. Yeah,
So, and then you joined her doing that. So you were working with game show developers and helping represent them with the bigger studios and the publishers and the people who
yeah,
get those games out into the
yeah.
world.
So when Jackie took me on, so basically I'd came from the world of console and handhelds, but during this
Yeah,
time, which is about 2003, mobile was taking off. Mobile games were
yeah,
taking off, and she brought me on to run that side of the agency.
yeah,
Now I'd had no experience at all about the mobile games, and I had to learn really
yeah,
quickly. And
yeah,
at the time, the main players at the time were the telecoms. It was BT and it was Vodafone. They were commissioning games to be put onto their phone. So yeah,
yeah.
I had to learn about that then. Yeah,
The industry just went so quickly and it
yeah,
changed so fast, didn't
yeah,
it?
yeah. It changed very, very fast. Yeah, I think yeah, it changed very fast. It's all gone very digital, and even now all the games are download.
And so what happened at the agency? So you were having to commute, you had the 6 kids, you had the baby, and you were having to commute up
Oh
to
no, the baby
London
hadn't come along
every
then. No,
day. All
the
right.
baby hadn't
Yeah,
quite come
yeah.
along. Yeah. And in terms of having a baby, my first choice actually was to actually adopt a child. Uh, we were going to try and
You were
adopt
looking at China, weren't
in
you? Yeah,
particular. Yeah, we were
yeah,
looking at China. We wanted to adopt a girl, and but at that time, the Chinese changed the rules. Basically, they had to have both
right.
parents had to be graduates. And that counted me out,
Yeah,
and the joint ages of
yeah,
both parents had to be 90, which Julian
right.
counted Julian at. So we couldn't do that. So yeah, and because I was an older mum, I mean it's about 39, 40 at the time. I found it very difficult to conceive and had rounds of IVF, and eventually said that it wasn't going to happen. So I was going to go down to Valencia and do egg donation. And I remember at the time saying, look, I would really like an Asian donor. And they said, well, that's going to take some time. And I said, don't worry, I'm happy to wait. And during that time, I got pregnant with Louis. So, as I say, I had one
That's
good egg left.
amazing.
Yeah, one good egg left. So yeah, so then
Yeah, yeah,
I had Louis. But at the same time as having Louis, which always seems to happen to me, is my boss Jackie decided to retire.
yeah.
Practically like a couple of months later. So I literally had to take up the reins very quickly while, still having a newborn, and take over the company.
So full on for you.
Yeah, it was really full on. Plus having these teenagers in the house and grandma next door, and yes, it was a very full on but very rewarding
Yeah,
time.
that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, because Julian's mum came and moved next door and
yeah,
needed quite a lot of care, didn't she? So
yeah.
you had grandma next door, the teenagers, the baby.
A newborn, yeah, and
And
premature. He was 6
yeah,
weeks early as well.
but that was quite an exciting time, wasn't it?
Very
At the
exciting
for
time.
the yeah. Yeah, and
Very exciting.
gaming was going through a lot of changes, wasn't it? Like it
Yeah,
was, I mean, in terms of the technology, it was almost like changing every day, wasn't
yeah,
it? The
yeah,
the way it was developing and
yeah,
changing with, I suppose, what you could do with, broadband and all of
yeah,
those kind of things
yeah.
in the mobile side.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah.
Were there things that you worked on that you found quite exciting at the time that you were, like things that you got to happen?
Ah, gosh, do you know what? Do you know what? One of my favorite things I ever did, um, was I was the producer on the Weakest Link game. So we had
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
so we did have to sign Anne Robinson to do it, and I think one of the highlights I have to say was good fun was picking her up at the Beverly Hills Hotel in a limo and driving her to this
Yeah.
massive trade show called E3,
Yeah.
and walking into this massive trade show which is so loud. I mean, it's just so noisy, and her saying. Turned around to her husband and said, "Do you think you could ask them to turn the noise down?" That's very Anne Robertson. Yeah, I have to say that's one of the. But honestly, that I've had so many highlights. I mean, I've been there with all the launches of PlayStation 1, 2, 3, 4. I even forget where we are at now with the PlayStation and the launches of the
Yeah.
Xbox. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's been a brilliant industry.
And you also invested in one of the companies.
This was a very exciting thing that happened, which basically allowed me to retire from the industry. So one of my
Yeah.
clients were called Supersonic, and they were a very
Yeah.
successful console handheld developer, but they wanted to move into mobile games. And I discovered this initiative, which was being set up, well, being funded by Nesta, who were looking for ideas to fund that were innovative in the technology. Which they had this idea of putting a bunch of developers together and seeing if they could form a publishing company. Um, so I suggested to my client Supersonic, I said, I think we should join this group in order to learn about the mobile industry. Group of six.
Yeah.
In the end, there was a group of us, six of us. I think it's a really great way to learn about the industry. But we also had to buy shares into this company. In the end, there were 6 developers who joined this company, and we became a publisher called Appy Nation. And with all these things, there's always one team that's going to make the hit. And that
Yeah.
was my developer, Supersonic. They made the hit. They had a word puzzle game, and it was just became very, very successful. So in fact, what actually happened was we bought out the other 5 developers, and Supersonic and myself and another person owned up Appy Nation. And I eventually basically sold my shares to Appy Nation, of Appy Nation back to Supersonic, and I retired from the games industry. That was 28
And I
years.
remember you saying, in a way, the agency and what you did kind of was changing anyway. It felt like the right time for you
A-
to step out.
Absolutely, absolutely. Marjack Micro, which Jackie started, was the first agency, and then of course a lot of agencies have come along. But more than that, a lot of the developers were being bought out by publishers, so
Yeah.
they didn't need an agent anymore. And I think
Yeah.
it's very much like the film industry. All the big publishers were buying out the smaller publishers. They were buying out the development studios, and it just felt, yeah, I was part of it for 28 years, and I saw a lot of changes. But I think for me as an agent, there wasn't any more roles for me, to be honest. So
Yeah. But then I remember coming to have dinner with you one night in Marylebone High Street at your pop-up shop.
oh,
So you moved quite quickly.
oh God, yes, yes. So Jackie, who was my previous, she found this fantastic furniture designer who'd make chairs basically out of clothes, uniforms, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And she asked me if I would basically run it for her, and I did. Didn't know a single thing about furniture. Had to learn about furniture and all the trade shows and how to market it and where to sell it, and yeah, and I did that for a bit, but unfortunately,
I mean, those chairs were beautiful.
they
I
were very
remember
beautiful.
I came to see you, and you had these 2 lovely American guys who were buying the chair, and they weren't cheap, these chairs, but
No,
they were more like a piece of art, weren't
they were
they? And this
beats
chair
them
was
up.
based on
Yeah,
a military uniform, like
yeah,
a kind of Victorian military
yeah,
uniform, I think. And it was very creative, the
yeah,
designer, and they were
yeah,
just amazing. And it was
yeah,
like your chair would be this real piece of
yeah,
art,
yeah. It's a talking point.
and that you just gone from gaming to chairs, because
Yeah,
I remember you saying, well, the opportunity arose, and I was like, well, why
yeah,
not?
yeah,
This
yeah,
is an exciting thing
yeah.
to do.
yeah. But in the end, it didn't work out.
But you tried it. You definitely, and you
Yeah,
probably know more about
yeah.
selling chairs than most of us do now,
Yes, I
or
learned a lot.
pieces of
Oh
art.
my God, about
Yeah.
shipping furniture, in the end, we actually did, yeah.
Obviously, your background was your family. They came from Hong Kong originally,
Mm,
didn't they? Your
mm, mhm,
parents,
mhm,
and they were literally immigrants here, weren't
mhm,
they? In
mhm.
the well, I guess the
The
60s,
60s.
70s, they
Yep, in the
came over.
60s. Yep.
Yeah, and they came over and set up. Your dad went set up restaurants, didn't
Yeah.
he?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's my absolute hero, my dad. I mean, he's not with us anymore, but he was my hero. He came over to England, didn't speak the language, hardly educated, left school at 13. And I always say he arrived at Heathrow, and instead of turning right into London, he turned left into Berkshire, and basically started a chain of restaurants in Berkshire and Buckinghamshire, and had I think about 6 in the end. Yeah, so
yeah, that was amazing.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So
yeah,
that hence, I was brought up with restaurant, in the restaurant business, and at the age of 13, he had us working in the restaurant on a Friday and Saturday night. So
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So you were put to work. You
yeah,
were learning how the industry worked, and you were having
mm,
to learn front of house
yeah,
and all of
yeah,
those kind of skills,
yeah,
which I suppose serve you well later in life. Really,
yeah,
having to work all of that out, and then but I remember you'd always talked about wanting to get back into food. It was something that was, I
yes,
mean, it's always been a passion for you, even in your personal life, hasn't it? You always cook for people, and
yeah.
you always cook beautiful, and you do a lot of
Oh, thank
Asian
you.
fusion
Yeah,
food, don't you?
yeah, yeah. I do.
Yeah.
So after I came out of Happy Nation, I did a bit of the furniture business. I thought, okay, what do I want to do next? And I thought, I do want to do something in food. I'm passionate about food, love cooking. And so I decided to buy a van and have a street food van. So I bought the van in February 2020. And then we all know what happened in March
Yeah.
2020. COVID,
Yeah.
yeah, struck, and obviously I wasn't in a position to then get my van converted into a street food van. So I owned this van for months, and it just kind of sat in a car park for months.
Yeah.
But obviously, eventually, I got it refurbished and created a van.
And
Yeah,
what was it called, your food van?
it was called Juju's Oriental Kitchen.
And what was the food? What was your offering?
Okay, so I kept it very simple. Everything was. I think this is
Yeah.
it. This is why in the end I kind of gave it up, because it was all about being homemade. So,
Yeah.
it was all, I mean, wontons were always the starter. So I always made the wontons, and every week there'd be two types of wontons on offering. Then there'd be dumplings as well. So there'd be dumplings as well. I always made the kimchi. And then there'd always only be one main course, which was vegetarian, one main course that was meat, and then either be noodles or rice. But everything, I made everything myself. People said to me, "Why are you doing that? Why don't you just buy it in?" I said, "Well, that's not the idea, is it? I love cooking,
Yeah.
so that's why I'm doing this."
We were still kind of going through COVID and lockdown, weren't we?
Yeah,
Because you had it on your driveway
yeah,
in your house. You were
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So basically, second round of COVID hit, and
Yeah.
all the restaurants were closed. But for some reasons, street food vans were allowed to operate. So I literally
Yeah.
operated my street food van every Friday and Saturday night outside my house, and that was a fantastic experience. It was actually kind of a thing that the whole family got involved in the way that Louis, my son, who was only 12 at the time, he was front of house. He was taking the
Yeah.
orders. He was taking the money. I was cooking. My husband was in charge of social distancing. So we used to have queues, and he had to move people apart, saying, "No, no, you've got to move apart." He'd also go around delivering the food. And I think for
Yeah.
each night, each time I think I would always have enough food for about 80 to 90 people. That's how much food I
Yeah.
would cook. And it sold out. Each time it sold
Yeah.
out, and it became this. Everyone knew that Juju's was going to be there on those 2 nights, and I got to meet neighbours I'd never met before. Yeah, it became like a social event, really.
Yeah, I
We're
bet.
not allowed to
Oh,
socialise.
absolutely.
We weren't allowed to
Yeah,
socialise, but
yeah.
yeah, so yeah, that was great
Yeah,
fun.
but it was like you could go and queue up and socially distance and chat to people in the line. I used to do the same thing in near where I live. We'd go and get noodles on a Friday night, and I'd often see people. You would wait for the noodles to be cooked, and you'd
Oh,
chat
yeah,
to people
yeah, yeah, yeah,
in Herne Hill. But I imagine because you were on your street and it was outside your house, you had
yeah,
that real kind of
yeah,
community
yeah,
thing
yeah.
going on. And also, I suppose you were doing to Louis, in a way, what your dad had done for you. You were sort of training him up for future business, whatever he does, of,
Yeah,
operating the till, talking to
yeah,
people, taking orders.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
He keeps reminding me now I never paid him. I
he'll
don't
be,
think he'd do
he'll
it
be
for me
wanting
now
that.
without being paid.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
it was a bit younger and a bit
yeah,
more innocent.
yeah.
After COVID, you kept going, and I remember you became quite successful, didn't you? You got lots of approaches about doing corporate work and
Yeah,
festivals, and
yeah. I mean, that was more just kind of general catering. In terms of the
mm,
actual van itself, I did do quite a few events with it, and I think in the end, I stopped doing it because some of these events, you just don't, you did, I didn't sell out. And there's
yeah,
nothing more demoralizing than coming back and with a whole lot of food that's not been
yeah,
bought, and actually just going around and giving it. In the end, I just gave it to the neighbours, and
yeah,
then you're waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning to start hand making your wontons and all that sort of stuff. And in the end, I decided this was supposed to be fun, and it wasn't
yeah,
fun. And I sadly I did give it up. Partly because I started
yeah,
losing my passion for cooking generally,
yeah,
cooking for my
yeah,
family, cooking for my friends, and that wasn't the idea. So I think in terms
yeah,
of my cooking now,
yeah,
I've got a really good balance now because I still have got a cellar full of catering equipment, and I still do the odd
yeah,
catering gig, which is I enjoy. But I've got my
yeah,
passion back again about cooking
yeah,
for
yeah.
family and friends. So
Exactly. I remember you saying to me, you said, oh, it was, I was getting up, I was lugging these massive big vats of
gal-
water, especially if
gallons of
you're
water,
off site.
gallons of
Yeah,
water.
gallons of water, and it was
Yeah,
heavy.
yeah,
And I remember you saying you were in your 50s and you
yeah.
thought life is too short to be getting up at 4 a.m. and chopping up spring onions. And
You remember
uh,
that? Yeah, was the chopping
I
up of
do.
the spring onions. Like,
It
oh my
was the
God,
spring onions.
Asian
Yeah,
food. There are so many spring onions, and you've got to wash them,
yeah.
cut them. It's like, oh God, hundred spring onions later.
But what I always stuck in my mind with the fact that you did that was you did it. And a lot of
Yeah,
people would have talked about it, but
yeah,
you actually went and you'd always wanted to follow that food dream in some shape or
yeah,
form.
yeah,
And you went and you tried it,
yeah,
and it was very successful
yeah,
until you decided you didn't
yeah,
want to. You didn't,
yeah,
you made that choice. It
yeah.
wasn't, which I thought was a good choice. It wasn't that it got taken away from you, and
No,
you were kind of in
yeah.
charge of that.
But
Um,
that's my ethos in life, and that's what I've always done. If I believe that, don't live life without fear, try it. You will have failures. I've had things that haven't worked out. I invested in a beauty salon, lost a lot of money on that. But when you do get a success, you forget about the failures, and it feels great. So that's
Yeah,
that's what
exactly.
that's something I always, if I always encourage people to do is try it. I like helping people. I think this is it. I think being an agent, it's like helping my developer. I really want to get
Yeah,
that work. I want to sell their game. I think that's my ethos. Like, just be helpful,
yeah,
because you never
yeah,
know where that leads.
exactly.
You never know where that's going to lead you.
With your food van and COVID and everything, did you
Mm.
find that you had a sort of different relationship with your local community after COVID? Did you sort of find you?
Absolutely, yeah, really positive, really,
Yeah,
really positive. Yeah, relationship with my neighbours now, and I think the other thing that I did during COVID, which was a really lovely thing to do, is we know quite a lot of elderly people who live around us, and I started cooking for them, and
yeah,
then again it was like a little family business. Julian and my son would then get on their bikes and cycle the food round to these people, and we actually ended up calling it the Louis Roo, you know. And I think what was really lovely about that is that then Louis would then deliver the food, and obviously socially distanced. He'd have a little chat with them, and it meant that they had human connection.
And do you see those people still? Do you
Yeah,
bump into
yeah,
them?
yeah, yeah. They're people we
Yeah,
know, so we still see them, and actually still
that's nice.
occasionally I still cook them a meal and send them around with Louis. Yes, I still do that. Yeah, I'm a feeder.
And what about when all of this whole time, especially I think, imagine when when you had the teenagers and you had,
Mm.
a small child, how did you sort of, what support systems did you have in place? Have you got family around you, or,
Yeah,
how are you?
yeah. Well, I think the business with the teenagers and that is, it was a partnership between my husband and I. There's no
Yeah,
way that either
yeah,
of us could have done it on our own. So that's how that worked. And I
yeah,
think, I think friendships are vitally important. And I think when you get to our age, you really, really know who your friends are. And it's not what I
yeah,
say is the quantity of friends you have, it's the quality of the friends you have, who are just there, that are there that you can phone them up, and because it wasn't easy, it
yeah.
really wasn't easy. But when you've got this small network of friends, that's really helpful.
I remember when my kids were young and I was
Mm,
doing a lot more travel than I do, a lot of
mm,
international travel. And I looked through those years and they were a bit of a blur. There was things that probably
mhm,
happened in people's lives and you think, I'm just pedaling to get through it. I'm just trying
mhm,
to be a good mother and wife
mm,
and do great
mm,
job at work and
mm,
and
mm,
keep all of those balls in the air. And it's
absolutely.
quite challenging. Do you do any mental well-being things or any
Oh,
physical activity?
yeah. Do you know what I love? I love walking. I love
Yeah,
walking, and I walk my dog every day, of course, but,
yeah,
I go on walking holidays,
yeah,
and the last one I just did was in the Spanish Pyrenees, and I just find it, yeah, I mean, I'm not a beach person, I'm not a pool person, I need to be doing things, and, I think walking's become my big thing, and I'm very
yeah.
thankful this dog
Yeah.
has come into my life because it's got me out there. Instead of going into a gym, which I used
Yeah.
to do, I used to go to gym regularly. Actually, and we're very lucky because we're in Brighton, so we've got the beach one side of us, and then behind us we've got the South Downs. So we've got some beautiful walks, we can go on here.
And is that something you've discovered in more recent years? Like when you were younger, did you just go to
No,
the gym
yeah,
and sort of,
definitely. It's
yeah,
definitely,
yeah,
I think basically since the dog came along. But no, I wasn't a
yeah,
walker.
yeah, yeah,
I wasn't a walker before the dog came along, but I've now discovered actually,
yeah,
and even now when
yeah,
I look at holidays, I go, okay, right, it's a walking holiday. Walking or
yeah,
cycling.
yeah, their
Yeah.
place. Moving on, the one thing I'm always interested when I talk to people is, was there something that you wanted to do as a child that still resonates with you today?
Um, it's not so much what I want to do, but it's how I want to be, I suppose, as that
Yeah,
resonates now.
yeah,
Is
yeah,
um, I think for me, coming from a Chinese family, and being a girl in a Chinese family, I never felt that close to my mother. So I
yeah,
always had this very independent and, I suppose, self-reliant aspect of that I wanted to be when I was a child. And I think it's always stayed with me. I am now still very
yeah,
independent and self-reliant, and it's something I will always be. So I think that's
yeah,
something that's been consistent from when I was a child to where I am today
yeah.
as an adult. Yeah.
And because I remember you explaining to me that Chinese culture very much values the sons,
Yeah.
especially the older son. If you're the older son, the pressure's really on the older son
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
deliver in a way for the
Yeah.
family. For the girls are, I think the way you had explained it were kind of less. held in less
Yeah.
esteem in the family.
Yeah, I think also
Yeah,
the thing is they always, I mean, the Chinese custom is that, basically the girl gets married off and they belong to that family now and they don't, they leave the
yeah,
family. I
yeah,
mean, it's not like that. It's not like
yes,
this now, but but it was,
yeah,
I felt very much felt like that. I think with my parents, they came over in the 60s and they brought with them all their values from Hong Kong,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
to England.
yeah,
And they tried to
yeah.
instill all these values into us, and it was difficult, really.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a story I hear quite often from
Yeah,
people who come from one culture and move to
yeah,
another. I can imagine that can
yeah,
be quite challenging.
yeah.
What about when you got a bit older, looking back in your life, is there advice that you'd give to your 25-year-old self? Like now, I mean, it's very easy to give advice to your 25-year-old self, I'm sure, but are there sort of things you go, oh, looking back, I just,
Oh yes, there'd be one. There'd be one I would definitely say. Uh, I would say, don't waste your time when people are not worth wasting time off.
yeah,
I think I kissed far too many frogs.
yeah. Well, you got to kiss frogs
Yeah,
to get to the prince,
yeah,
I think.
exactly. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah,
So I would say that to a 20, my 25,
yeah,
25-year-old
yeah,
now, definitely. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And flipping that to your now self, can you see yourself giving yourself advice to your 75-year-old self? Just say you're talking to your 75-year-old self. Is there anything you'd say to that 75-year-old Julie?
To the 75-year-old Julie,
Yeah,
I would
yeah,
say,
now, yeah,
do you know what? I'd just say keep going to 75-year-old Julie. I think life's different now, isn't it? I don't think it's not so set that you've got to retire, you've got to stop, you've got to. I don't think life's like that. I think you just keep going, you keep trying, you keep living.
you were telling me about your Uncle Jimmy.
Oh, yes, my Uncle
Um,
Jimmy. Yeah, so I lost my Uncle
yeah,
Jimmy quite recently, but before he died, he did say to me, in particular to Julian, who's a bit older than me, he said to me, he said, "Tell Julian not to retire. Never retire. It's no good retiring. Keep going." And actually, you saying that's just reminded me that's exactly how I feel. Keep going. Keep going. Why retire? I mean,
yeah,
you can retire from, I always say I'm retired from the video games industry. But I'm
yeah,
not retired
yeah.
from life,
Yes, yeah, and from a working life as
from a
well.
working life either. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
when we talked about this, you were like, "Well, I've done my sort of food van, and so
Mhm.
why do you want to interview me?" And the reason I wanted to interview you is because I think it's really interesting that it's not neatly tied up. You
Mm,
tried that
mm,
story, you tried
mm,
that, you did it, and you
mm,
decided it wasn't for you, and now
mm,
you're thinking about what you want to do next. And I
mm,
think that's quite exciting, and I also
mm,
think it's much more relevant to life and to all of the people that we talk to, that
mm.
it's not always a clear, happy
No.
ending. Oh, this is what I've done, and now I'm on
No.
this journey. It might be like
Yeah.
I tried it, and actually now I'm going to see where the next
Yeah.
journey is going to take me. Because at the moment that's what you're doing, isn't it? You're
Yeah.
thinking, oh, what am I going to do
Yeah.
next?
Yeah. No, so I mean, where am I at today? Well, I would say that I have got a portfolio of work. So
Yeah,
I still do a bit of catering every now and then. I've
yeah,
got this new, very exciting venture at the moment. I've got a friend who's writing a cookery book. She's a
yeah.
nutritionist and she's writing a cookery book for women who are going through the menopause. And she's asked me to be her recipe developer. I
Fantastic.
know. So she's writing the recipes. She hands them over to me. I've got to cook them. I've got to critique them. I've got to put the cooking time in,
Yeah,
the prep time in, make sure it obviously tastes good. So I'm doing that at the moment, which is really exciting. The other thing that I decided I wanted to do, which falls into like, got to try it. So my background, as you say, is very much media. I've been in TV, I've been in video games, I've been in the music, and there's one industry that I thought I have not been in the media. I think is film. I haven't been in the film industry, so I thought, oh, quite interesting to get a feeling about the film industry. So now I work a little bit as an extra in the film world, and again, loving it. Absolutely loving it. Fascinated watching a film being shot. I'm meeting very interesting
yeah,
people.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet, because it's you get all sorts, don't
Yeah.
you, in
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
in that film world,
Yeah.
especially in extra work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah.
I'm loving
Have you
it.
done some exciting projects?
Yes, I have. So the best thing I've ever done was I actually was a stand-in for Michelle Yeoh in Wicked, the new movie,
Oh,
Wicked.
amazing.
Yeah, which comes out in November. But obviously, as a stand-in, I won't be seen because I'm there just
Yeah,
standing while while they're putting the set together and lighting together and all that sort of stuff. But that was incredibly
yeah,
exciting because I got to work with
yeah,
Ariana Grande and all those people. That was great fun. So, yeah, so you don't know where it
yeah,
leads
yeah.
you. Yeah. So,
No. Is there advice that you give to people, in terms of career and life advice, to sort of people when you're talking that you give to people?
yeah, I do. I always say, don't give up, keep trying. I think. That's in terms of a career, and don't be worried about failure. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
really don't be worried about failure. I In terms of life, I would always say, and um, live life without fear. Something I find myself saying to a lot of people:
yeah.
live life without fear. And I think the other thing is be kind and be helpful.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Is
That's
there
it.
anything you felt really grateful for in your life that you think, oh, actually, that I've been really lucky to have had,
I have been very
whatever that
lucky.
is?
I've been very lucky. I mean, I've just fallen into things. I mean, I always claim that I've only actually really had two job interviews in my life, and that was when I was 16, going for a job interview as a nanny, and the second job
Yeah,
interview was my first job interview in the music industry when I was 17, and I got that job as well. And then after that, it's just literally. Uh, Knowing I wanted to do something and thinking, well, I had the secretarial skills, so I could always go into any industry I wanted. So you just get in
yeah,
there. And basically, I've fallen into jobs or been headhunted. So, yeah, I'm very grateful. I feel very, we came down to Brighton to help to help my nieces and nephew out, but I'm very grateful that we've ended up in Brighton.
it's a nice place to be, isn't it,
Yeah,
by the sea?
yeah,
I
it
know
is.
you and I talked about this, and you said you didn't know, but I want you to try your hardest in terms
Yeah.
of, because this was what inspired me to do this
Mhm.
podcast and the series of articles, was writing my mother-in-law's obituary, and
Yeah.
it kind of got
Yes.
me thinking about what I
Yeah.
wanted my obituary to say, and so I suppose my question to you is, what would you want your obituary to say?
Okay, I think I've thought of something. She always
Okay,
tried.
good.
Yeah, she always
she
tried.
al-
Yeah,
she
she
always
always
tried.
tried.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She
Just
always tried.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think just try and don't be fearful of failure. I've
Yeah.
only learnt about this thing of not fearing failure through life experience. Obviously
Yeah.
you fear failure, but I look at failure now and I go, okay, it didn't work. Don't stop trying.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I suppose the idea is that you can learn from that failure, can't you? That
Absolutely.
without that, you can't. Yeah.
You can't move on. I think there's one more big thing that I need to do or achieve. I don't know what it is yet,
Yeah.
but once I do, I'm going to execute it.
Yeah, you will.
Mm,
Absolutely. Of that,
Yeah,
I have absolutely no doubt.
I think thank
All
you very
right.
much for giving me the opportunity to reflect on my life. Actually, it's come up at a very good time in the way that my son is just finishing GCSEs, so that's period is closing, and now he's going to be doing his A levels, and so it's this doing this has come at a very good time because it has been helpful to look back at my life.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And all that you've done and all that you are. And I also think, I suppose in a way, what I don't want these interviews to be is about what people have achieved, not necessarily
Yeah,
achievement. As you
yeah,
say, it's about who you are. It's about
yeah,
more than just achievements. It's about, acts of kindness. It's about
yeah,
all of those things, because that's what we take with us, isn't it? That's what
yeah,
we remember about people. So
yeah.
thank you so much, Julie. You've been so
Oh, thanks,
wonderful.
Barsha.
So, if you enjoyed this, please do subscribe to One Precious Life and check out my newsletters on Substack. Thank you.